Hello and welcome back to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen. I'm an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa, and I present these videos every week for a couple different reasons. The first of which is just to move my brain out of the mode of background work over the course of the week and move into the process of actually writing and preparing the sermon that I will present to my congregation for the weekend. That's the first reason. The second reason I do these is just to allow you, the viewer who have come across this video for whatever reason has brought you here today, to gain some different insight into the assigned gospel text for the week. So that is why I do these. A couple of housekeeping items. For those of you who might be regular viewers, thank you. This week, my videos crossed 10,000 views. Now, is this a humongous number? No, but I think it's pretty cool. So kudos to all you who've been checking out my videos. Much appreciated. Also, today, as I am recording this, it is March 17th, 2017. Happy St. Patrick's Day to all you out there, whether you claim to be Irish or not. Check out the green shirt. Happy St. Patty's Day. So hope that your celebration, if you embark in that, will be joyful and safe with that. Okay, so that being said, this particular Sunday, which is March 29th, 2017, the third Sunday of Lent, we are continuing through the Gospel of John, or for a period of time in the Gospel of John. As I mentioned last week in the video, we were going into a section of where for about 4 weeks we'll be in John's Gospel instead of in Matthew, which is where we normally are. Last week we had the story of Nicodemus coming to Jesus at night, and now this week we have a very long Gospel, one that I'm actually not going to read like I normally do just because of its length. But our Gospel lesson for this particular Sunday comes out of John chapter 4. The lectionary starts at verse 5 through 42. I am very likely going to back up just a little bit and utilize, in the very least, verses 3 and 4. I may go all the way back to verse 1. I'm not quite sure. But as per usual, as I mentioned, I read the text and then I kind of start to talk about it. I'm not going to do that today just because of its length. So for that reason, pull out your Bibles or go to Google and look up John chapter 4 and read like 1 through 42. I'll wait. You can hit pause if you want to. Okay, did you read it? Great. So again, this particular story is known as the Samaritan Woman at the well and Jesus' encounter with her, and some things that are going on. Again, I know I mentioned that this one is juxtaposed to Nicodemus coming at night to Jesus. A word on night versus day. In John's Gospel, the idea of darkness indicates a lack of understanding, a lack of faith, a lack of acceptance of that Jesus, or belief that Jesus is God, kind of all that wrapped into one, and that's for John's Gospel, not believing that Jesus is God. That is sin, singular. So we see in these two stories a very important distinction between the two. We have a teacher of Israel, one of the leaders of the council, and again, if you want more information on this, check out last week's video. But Nicodemus, who comes at night when it's dark, remains in the dark, and seemingly, at least in that story, does not come to faith, just cannot understand, cannot comprehend, and we're left with the question from Nicodemus, how can this be? Now, fast forward, like not very far. There's a little bit of information, or a little bit of narrative that goes on at the end of chapter 3 that leads up to chapter 4. And now where we're at, Jesus has been in Jerusalem, which is in the south. He's returning to Galilee, which is where he does the bulk of his ministry, is kind of in the northern region. And we hear in verse 4, he had to go through Samaria. Now, what is Samaria? Samaria was a region. That's a name given to what was the northern kingdom of Israel. And this dates all the way back to 8 or 9 centuries before Jesus would have been around. And the divided kingdom of Israel, we have Judah in the south, which is where Jerusalem is. We have Samaria, or Israel, in the north, which is where this takes place. And a little bit later on in their history, Israel or Samaria was conquered by the Assyrian Empire. Some of the elite were taken off into exile, and the Assyrian Empire brought people in to kind of repopulate the area. And the intermingling of the Assyrian people with the Jewish people there resulted in Samaritans. Samaritans and Jewish people now in Jesus' time, they don't get along very well at all. There's a lot of animosity between the two around a lot of different things. There's some cultural differences. There's headbutting over who is right in terms of worship. They worship the same God. They are still Jewish. But I'll use that term very lightly. They worship on a different mountain, whereas the Jewish culture, pure blood Jewish culture, anyway, consider the point of worship to be at the temple in Jerusalem, which is, of course, in the south. So there's a lot of angst between the two. And even though there's a Jewish settlement or Jewish contingent that lives up in Galilee, which is, of course, where Jesus is at, or where he's going, and where he's active, and they have their own stigmas of that. The interaction between the two is tense at best. And normally a Jewish person would not go through Samaria. If you're familiar with the geography at all, when it says he had to go to Samaria or had to go through Samaria, no, he didn't. Typically, what people would do is if they were traveling between Galilee and Jerusalem or vice versa, they would go out to the east, they would cross the Jordan River, and they would travel up the Jordan River past Samaria and then come into Galilee that way. That's just kind of what they did. So when they say he had to go through Samaria, the Greek is actually, it was necessary to go through Samaria. It's slightly different, but important distinction. Why? It raises the question of why. And I would pose something, and I'm going to sound a lot like one of my professors who did her PhD in the book of John. We hear in Nicodemus' story, Jesus says probably one of the top three most well-known passages in the Bible, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him may not perish but have eternal life. Well, what does that mean by the world? Does that mean the Jewish nation? No. Does that mean the elite who are the followers of the law? If Nicodemus if his example is to be considered? No. But who is the world? All the world. And so it would be eye-opening for the Jewish people to hear, okay, that means Samaria, and not only Samaria, that means a woman, and not only a woman, but a woman who has stigma. And with that, I'm going to get into the story here. Now, what happens, nutshell, hopefully you went back and read it. If not, hey, pause, go read it. Okay, did you read it? So what goes on here is at the well, we've got this woman who comes to the well at noon, the brightest part of the day, the most light and darkness. Okay, you catching up there? And she has this back and forth with Jesus. Now, Jesus has been traveling through. His disciples have left him here at the well, Jacob's well, which interestingly enough is, well, I'm not going to go into that. So Jesus is here resting at the well in the heat of the day, tired out from his journey, which would have taken several days to kind of walk the distance that they had to go. And his disciples are off in town finding food, and lo and behold, this woman comes on her own to fetch water. Now, this is abnormal for a couple of different reasons. Normally, women would have come from the community together, and they would have probably come in the morning and or in the evening when it's cooler. Some things I've read said that they would maybe come twice. It would be their thing. And it's thought that the village that they would have been coming from, the town or whatever, the city, was probably about a mile away from where this well is. Now, as they go back and forth, Jesus asks for a drink, and the woman kind of is dismissive at first. And there's this progression of conversation between the two. There's this interaction that's ongoing. And it's really important to recognize that dialogue, that unlike Nicodemus, who asks a few questions and then kind of fades away and it becomes a monologue, these two stay at it. They're back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And they are spending time together. They are getting to know one another. They are abiding together. And that's an important notion in John's gospel of abide, come and see, come and experience for yourself. As they go back and forth, one of the points that I want to make, and a direction that I'm going to really go with this, is as Jesus makes an effort to get to know her, or seemingly already knows her based on what he says to her, her eyes begin to open up, and she begins to see more and more and more about Jesus. And we see that in the names that she calls him, the things that she says about him. And I really appreciate this progression that she goes through. First, it's he's just a Jew and a Jewish man, and that's all it is. Then as they begin to talk, then she calls him sir. And that actually happens, I think, twice. Then eventually, as they continue back and forth, she realizes there's something about this guy, and clearly the presence of God is with him. He must be a prophet, and that's the next one that comes up. And finally, and there's two more. Then eventually she calls him, or she starts to talk about Messiah, and not necessarily speaking about him specifically, but she uses Messiah, and she actually uses the Hebrew rather than the Greek, which is probably what they would have been speaking at the time. But the Greek is Messias, sounds a lot like Messiah. In Greek, she would have said Christos or Christos. They mean the same thing. They mean God's anointed one. But for her to actually use the Hebrew makes me think, oh, well, she's trying to impress this prophet. So she's going to use Hebrew to show that, hey, well, I know what's going on too. But then eventually she has this amazing realization, what I oftentimes describe as a spiritual 2x4 upside the head. Faith happens. And so she becomes a witness. And this is really, really important, that this unexpected woman, the unexpected person, the last person that you would expect to be the person to become a disciple and to become an apostle, to become a follower of Jesus, does. And she goes into town and she shares, and it's interesting because she words it as a question. This could not be the Messiah, could it? But then that time she does use Christos. But because of her testimony, because of this is what has happened to me, this is my experience with the Christ, come and see, which echoes exactly the initial discipleship situations in John's gospel when he first encounters Andrew, and Andrew asks, where are you staying? And Jesus says, come and see. And then Andrew comes to see and spends time, abides, menos, that's the Greek word for abide. And then he goes and he gets Peter and brings him. And then we see the same sort of thing with Philip. Philip experiences Jesus and goes and gets Nathanael and brings him. And now this woman experiences Jesus, has a revelation, and runs off to town and says, come and see. And they do, and Jesus remains, and many believe because of their experience with him. And that's overarching big story. That's what's going on. I need to back up just a little bit. I'm starting to wonder if I've even taken a breath here in the time that I've been talking. Clearly, I like this story, but there's so much going on. I need to say a word about the woman. Typically, because of the situation, the idea, the assumption about this woman is that she's quote unquote sinful. And why? Well, because she's had 5 husbands and now she's living with a guy who she's not married to. That is a mistake to make that assumption. Now, is it possible? Yes, but it is extraordinarily unlikely when we consider the cultural mores. I don't even know if that's a word. The cultural norms of the time. Very likely what's going on with this woman, why she's coming at noon, it could be 2 different reasons. One, she might just be fetching water for people who are working in the fields nearby. Because they're in the countryside. So that is possible. She may just have come to fetch water for the workers. And that's why she's there at noon. The other reason that she's there at noon is she probably does have something of a reputation or a stigma. But it's not because she's sinful, aka that she's a prostitute or whatever. Very likely what's going on with this woman is that she's been divorced or abandoned those 5 times. Or widowed is possible too. And there's a quote unquote law about when a woman dies childless from a marriage, that the brother or the closest male relative of the husband then has to marry her to care for her. That's just kind of something that would have gone on. So it's possible that she's just been widowed 5 times. And so the thought of the day is, well, what's wrong with this woman that she would be cursed like this, that her husbands just keep dying? So maybe number 6, or this guy she's living with now, is just like, no, I'm not going to marry you because I don't want to be cursed too. But yet he cares for her. The other possibility and perhaps probability is that this woman has been divorced many times because she's barren. And that is the resulting stigma that she has, that perhaps that's why she's coming at noon and not with the women in the morning and the afternoon, because she has the stigma, and maybe she just has accepted it, and she says, my situation is my situation, and so I will come at this time, when I don't have to face criticism or whatever. We don't know. Long story short, we don't know about this woman. We can make some assumptions, but we have to recognize that they are just assumptions. And the typical assumptions that we make, that she is sinful, that she is a bad person, we need to throw out the window, because there is nothing in the conversation between her and Jesus that indicates that. Nothing at all. The only thing that we hear is that she's had 5 husbands, and now she's being cared for by someone who she's not married to. Period. So, okay. Now, based on that, what's important about this woman, and the final point that I want to make, is she is seen by Jesus. He sees me. He doesn't see the stigma. He doesn't see judgment. He doesn't see problems. He doesn't see a curse. He doesn't see whatever else it is that has isolated this woman from community. Whatever it is, whatever it is, he doesn't stop there. But he sees her as a person. And when she goes and she testifies, he has told me everything that I've ever done. That's not a negative. That's not like he's passed judgment on everything that I've ever done, just that he understands. He sees me. And because he sees her and engages with her, that allows the opportunity for her to begin to experience God in the flesh right in front of her. And to come into realization of this is who it is, and because of that, then she goes and she becomes a witness. She becomes a evangelist of come and see, to offer that invitation. I've gotten pretty lengthy here, so I kind of want to wrap this up. There's so much more going on in here, and there could be countless different sermons to come out of this place, or out of this rather lengthy story. But that's kind of the direction that I'm going with it in my head. Of this is an example of how God sees us, all of us, and sees us as someone of worth, someone worth being in relationship with, someone worth being with, of spending time with. And because God is willing to come to us as we are, and see us as someone of value, it allows us the opportunity to experience God and to look past our assumptions to see the truth of who God is, and that God is right before us. Okay, if you have thoughts or questions or comments or other ideas of what jumps at you from this story, by all means, throw that down in the comment section. We will continue the conversation that way. Otherwise, I hope you have a blessed week, and we will catch you next time.